Bang! Neeves Knives. I'm Jared, and this is the Divo Prowler. Now, this is done by LEFTYEDC. He's the owner of Divo Knives, and I've only had this a little bit. I did kind of rush the review a little bit, and in this review, we are going to sharpen and do cut tests and everything with it, but I wanted to rush it a little bit because this is going to be in production here pretty soon, and it's not going to be a pre-order thing. They're just going to have them. They're going to sell them. So I wanted to make sure I could give them some feedback pretty quickly. Now, this is going to be a White Mountain Knives exclusive, and it's going to have some subtle changes. Usually I don't like to review something that's going to have a lot of changes because it makes it to where I'm not even reviewing the same knife. But in this case, they're subtle. Not even a big deal. It's only going to improve it. Like one thing, they're going to put a reversible deep carry clip on it. They're going to contour the edges just slightly, which in this case, man, this thing is super comfortable in the hand. It slightly feels boxy, and I mean slightly. So it's only going to maximize the comfort in your hand, and it's already super comfortable. So very awesome there. And the since this is a prototype, it has D2 steel. That's going to be 14C28N, which you guys know. If you know, I do love 14C. Fantastic budget knife steel. Good edge retention. Great sharpening. Takes a killer edge. And it's easy to apply. And great stainless. Just lots of great properties for a budget knife or a user knife. So we'll get more into steel and everything here in a minute because we are going to sharpen this. But anyways, this one has D2. Let's talk about the action, though. The action is incredible on this thing. I mean, this thing, fantastic action. The access to the hole deployment, I mean, you can see the hole is a nice big hole. In LEFTYEDC, he's a lefty, so you know it's going to be good for the left-hand flick, but equally as good for the righties. The thumb flick, also really good. Both the reverse flick and the thumb flick is both really, really good. Not only the access, but the way, it sits in your hand and how your finger, reacts to the hole is really, really good. You can quickly do it rapidly. The detent is very well tuned. Oh, by the way, Shieldin Knives is the one who OEM'd this. And I don't mean this in an insulting way, but this is surprisingly good. And I don't mean that in an insulting way to Shieldin. It's really, really good, though. Detent is very well tuned. Great detent for the reverse flick, and it is practically a guillotine. It's a guillotine. It is very fall shutty. The detent, when you unlock it, it's not the earliest, but it's very easy to get past. You don't have a flipper tab in the way, so it's never hung up on me. I've never sat there and messed around on the detent right there. It's always easy to get past. So now, I forgot to mention too, it's going to have a D-shaped pivot. That's another thing. But that's internally, so that's a good thing. The access to the lock bar. You would think it doesn't look like it has the best access, especially because this side is not cut back and it is lined up with the lock bar. Just looking at it, I would think that I would struggle with it a little bit because usually I struggle with when the scale is lined up with the lock bar. It almost seems like I'm trying to disengage the actual scale itself. But in this case, it works great. The access to the lock bar is fine. I wouldn't complain about it at all. It's perfectly fine. So disengaging it in the action all around is great. The ergos now, man, this thing melts in my hand. And then coupled with this geometry, it passes through material so good. We'll talk about that in a second. I don't feel the clip barely at all. It's almost like it doesn't have a clip on there. And we're going to get into why, but it is very comfortable in the hand. Even if I'm back here, super comfortable. This is something that if you are annoyed by clips, you're going to love this because it is crazy comfortable in the hand. You don't feel the clip at all. Like I said, a little tiny bit boxy, but it's going to be contoured on the edges at the very least. So, and honestly, if it wasn't, I wouldn't even care because it is still very comfortable. The geometry, it is nice and broad. The blade is very broad, and the grind itself, it is a flat grind, but the way it is flat ground, seeing that the grind is so broad and the taper going from the spine thickness down to the edge is nice and slow. You know, it doesn't rapidly taper down to the thinness behind the edge. It slowly tapers down to the edge thickness. So it passes through materials like a dream. I mean, this thing cuts so good. Now, I can't find my calipers to measure the behind the edge thickness. If I find them, I'll put it on the screen. But it feels nice and thin behind the edge. I would guess under 20 thousandths. And even if it's right at 20 thousandths, the blade is nice and broad. It passes through great, and it cuts so good. Now, with the cutting performance, it is mostly belly. So it can have the tendency to slip out of a cut if you're going really fast. However, because the ergos are so good and it's super comfortable and the blade passes through material very easily, you can comfortably kink your wrist just a little bit and trap the edge into the material and do repeat cutting without really worrying about it slipping out of a cut. Now, maybe if it's super dense materials, you know, maybe, but for the most part, since it's passing through so easily, you don't get fatigued holding your wrist a little bit kinked in order to pass it through, even very long cuts. So the cutting performance is just fantastic on it. But like I said, it is basically all belly, and the tip, it's not a very acute tip, and it is up a little bit high. So in order to do utility cuts, well, let's just say the utility cuts aren't great. It's not the best utility cutter. You're usually going to wind up falling right here in this area, and you're going to use a little bit of the belly for those types of cuts. Now, if you need to just get by and do one utility cut, you'll be fine. But if you're going through dense things, or if you're doing, you know, repeated anything like really fine detailing, it's not going to be the best. It just doesn't have an acute enough tip, and it has too big of a belly. You can get by with it, but it's not going to be your primary for that type of thing. But for basic EDC, it'll be just fine. Like if you're going to open up a box or something, you'll be fine. Now, before we get into sharpening and stuff like that, let's talk about the clip and the carry. So the clip, one little complaint, but I almost don't want to complain about it because I found a way around it. But when I go to put it in my pocket, the ramp going into the pocket, it's not very high. And that's also why in the hand it's so comfortable. Now, back here, this is tall enough just fine, but it's a low ramp right here going into the pocket. However, when I go to put it in my pocket and it hits right there, I found a way just to push out on my pocket and it slips right in. So I found a way around it and it works great. I can easily get it in and out of my pocket just by pushing out on my pocket with the knife when I want to go in one-handed. And I'm specifically talking about one-handed. If you use two hands, you can just grab your pocket and slip it right in. So it's not that big of a deal. However, if it was ramped up just a little bit higher, I could easily do it one-handed without pushing my pocket out, and it wouldn't get caught. But if I just go to drop it in one-handed, my pocket does hit there without slipping right over. But it is inset with flat screws, and it's going to be reversible, so that is awesome. T8 hardware all the way around except for the clip. Or wait, is the clip T8? No, they're T6s. So, yeah, I didn't take the clip off. But anyways, the scales on the inside they do not have pockets or anything, but it is very light. I mean, this is not a knife I would even care if it had any pockets in it because it's not heavy at all. So, and in the pocket, it is slim. It's not a thick knife. It is nice and slim, so it carries just fine. Carries perfectly fine. It is a little bit broad in the pocket, so you know the imprint is a little wide, but the thickness is not. It's not really thick, so it carries. You know, I didn't mind it at all. It didn't feel bulky or anything like that. Now, the sharpening. Now, with a knife like this, with this big of a belly, as you're coming across the stone, you want to start with the heel. As you're coming across the stone, I'm going to start lifting my elbow in order to hit this section right here. And as I lift my elbow, it'll end up getting to the tip eventually, and I can use my finger to make sure I get the tip. Now, the angle is separate from my elbow, so I'm holding my angle firm with my wrist. So here's my angle. I'm not going to change like this, but I will change like this in order to get the entire blade as I go across the stone. So the biggest issue so far is the heel right here. It's just because of where the plunge goes and everything, the grind from the original sharpening is just a little bit off, but that's pretty normal. So no big deal. Just takes a little bit more work. Just got to keep on working at it until your edge lines up all the way across from heel to tip. But sometimes it can be a little annoying because it'll take so much longer to hit the heel. And this is on like 90% of knives, so this isn't this knife. Not even a little bit. Most knives do this, and you know, just it can be a little more frustrating to hit this side or this part of the edge. And that's why I you know, get so crazy about plunge grinds and where they land and being separated from the edge, because that way the grind is nice and even leading down to the edge, even from the beginning near the choil. So instead of trying to get the heel of the blade to 100%, I am just going to get it as good as I can get through the sharpening that I'm going to do. The rest of the edge is, I have a burr on. The only spot I'm really missing is just right here at the very, very tip of the heel, but I can just let that come out on the second sharpening. All right, now we're going to do a burr removal, but today we're going to do a burr removal on a little ceramic plate. And just gently letting the burr snag the ceramic. And then I will move on to the strop. No pressure. There we go. This strop has gunny juice on it, 6 micron. Now, I wanted to show you the sharpening so you knew how to sharpen a blade shape like this, with a big belly and everything. But this knife specifically, sharpening it, a couple little issues after sharpening. The grind is a little bit off right here. You can see where and it's probably just the way it was ground sharpening it. This happens a lot on production knives, so it's not even this knife. It's just a thing. I did not finish it. I just left it alone, and I'll get it on the next sharpening. But the grind was a little bit off from one side to the other. You can especially see it in the tip right here. You see how the thickness, how thick it is right there. Now if I flip it over, you can see it does not match up. It's smaller on this side. Is it that big of a deal? No, this is a prototype, but the grind is not even on one side to the other. Most of it is, but there's like one spot right here that's a little bit thicker on this side than it is on this side. It might be difficult to see, and it might wind up matching up after I spend a little bit more time and fully get the heel of the blade. But there was a couple little spots that didn't match one side to the other. It is a prototype, so, not that big of a deal. The plunge grind, it's almost like an illusion because it looks like it ends right here, but then there's also a line right there that ends right there. So it's very weird how the plunge grind is on this. I kind of wish it just had an exact placement, which would be far away from the edge, something like right here where you can easily see that it's far away from the edge. But in this case, it kind of is like an optical illusion, and it's very difficult to see where it ends. And I'm guessing it ends right at the edge, so I'd like to see that backed up a little bit, and it might be farther away from the edge than it seems. Like I said, it's almost like an illusion. It's kind of difficult to tell. Anyways, but other than that, the steel felt fine on the stone, but that doesn't matter because the steel's not going to be the same. I will say it kind of maybe felt a little bit soft on the stone, but doesn't matter because it's a prototype and it probably is. So not that big of a deal. The 14C is a lot easier for companies to heat treat, and I imagine, their production stuff will be probably, better anyways. And the grind too, like I said, since this is a prototype, I imagine they might have rushed it a little bit, and, being the first batch that they do and all that stuff, it is what it is. But the finish is a beautiful satin finish, but I think they're going to change it to a stone wash anyways, which might hide that the illusion of the plunge, I guess. Anyways, the stop pin is a regular stop pin, nice lockup. Very solid lockup. Now, when it's closed, it hits behind the edge right there. Normally, I complain about that, but in this case, it is in the thickest part of the steel, and it's far away from the edge, so not a big deal. But if you're going to do an external stop pin, do it, like this or down here where it hits. Just don't let it hit right behind the edge, and in this case, they didn't, so that's awesome. Negative things, I already spoke about the plunge grind. I'd like to see the plunge grind just stopped way before the edge. Next, I complained about the grind being off from one side to the other, the ramp of the clip. Other than those things, really, this thing's a winner. I like it a lot. And even just the way it is, nothing changed on it. I like it. So I'm very happy with it. And then I can only imagine after the scales are slightly contoured and it's 14C, reversible clip, D-shaped pivot, and it's in a final production, which will be a little bit more refined, I'm sure, to some extent. This thing's going to be amazing. I like it a lot. It's definitely a knife that I like the style of. I love the look of it. I love the flow of the handle flowing over than to the spine, and then the clip down, you know, the way it clips. I think it looks good. It's a good looking knife. You know, I think some knives, you know, they have to sell you on the look. You know, ugly knives, they get a lot of hate. And in this case, to me, this is a good looking knife. I do prefer a lower facing tip so I can do better utility cuts. That'd probably be my biggest downfall on this. But regardless, since the geometry is so good and it cuts so good, you know, it kind of makes up for that. But there you guys go. I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.